Socrates once said, "To fear death, gentlemen, is no other than to think oneself wise when one is not." In the face of death, Socrates showed no fear, but instead held to his values, wisdom, and justice. Throughout this video, I'd like to explore the significance of the view of death that Socrates offers in Plato's Apology, and why its arguments are stronger than commonly thought. To understand Socrates towards death and how he came to be in the trial of the Apology, one must first know Socrates towards life. Socrates came to be known through his verbal philosophical inquiries, attempting to penetrate truths with countless individuals throughout Athens. While this got him his name, it also made a number of enemies. As it turns out, proving to aristocrats that they don't know much about justice or piety tends to upset them. One particular aristocrat, Anytus, would employ Miletus to bring Socrates to court for corrupting the youth in impiety. It is Socrates' speech at this trial where the apology takes place, and where Socrates articulates a crucial part of his and the overall Platonic view on death. The beginning of his defense is telling of the kind of man Socrates is. It includes the famous mention to the oracle who said that there was no man wiser than Socrates. Throughout it, Socrates admits his unwavering dedication to wisdom, justice, and the pursuit to find out what exactly those things are. But as seen by this trial, the practice of philosophy, particularly the Socratic method in ancient Greece, can jeopardize one's life. But this does not dissuade his commitment. Socrates makes a case that, even when challenged by death, the good man must choose the just over his own life, saying, "Someone might say, 'Are you not ashamed, Socrates, to have followed the kind of occupation that has led to your being now in danger of death?' However, I should be right to reply to him, 'You are wrong, sir, if you think that a man who is any good at all should take into account the risk of life or death. He should look to this only in his actions, whether what he does is right or wrong, whether he is acting like a good or a bad man.'" This is an understanding fundamental to the likes of Socrates and Plato, that one must face death, and in the right manner, in order to live a good life. At times, it will be one's fear of death that will drive them to do wrong. In clinging to one's life, the unjust person will make bad decisions in order to hold on to it, like the soldier who, even in the face of death, would be wrong to flee. This challenge to justice that the fear of death poses plays a larger role in the Republic, but Socrates, throughout the Apology, serves as the exemplar by placing justice over the threat to his very life. Continuing his criticism of the fear of death from the point of justice, Socrates follows this up with a first of his two arguments against the fear of death in the Apology, the argument from uncertainty, wherein he says, "To fear death, gentlemen, is no other than to think oneself wise when one is not, to think one knows what one does not know. No one knows whether death may not be the greatest of all blessings for a man, yet men fear it as if they knew that it is the greatest of evils. And surely it is the most blameworthy ignorance to believe that one knows what one does not know. It is perhaps on this point and in this respect, gentlemen, that I differ from the majority of men. And if I were to claim that I am wiser than anyone in anything, it would be in this, that as I have no adequate knowledge of things in the underworld, so I do not think I have." Socrates is challenging the commonly held view that death is the greatest of evils, and instead suggesting that, as no one can be certain whether death is truly a harm or a benefit, no fear of death can be justified in confidence. Any person to fear death or to look forward to death would be epistemologically irresponsible, as it is beyond the certainty of one's knowledge. But the argument from uncertainty does not relieve all fears of death, because there remains the possibility of death being a harm. One may not be sure that death is the greatest of evils, but they may still fear the possibility. Alone, the argument from uncertainty does not succeed in radically changing one's fear of death, only to subvert its certainty. When considered out of context, it seems of little significance, but when combined with the aforementioned conflict between living well and fearing death, it has strong consequences. When one is faced with the choice between doing what is right and living, where one's life is on the line as it may be in the battlefield, there becomes the clear, correct choice. One must turn away from the fear of death and do what is right. The reason being, as a result of the argument from uncertainty, that death is not certain to be bad, while fleeing the battlefield is. As Socrates says, I shall never fear or avoid things of which I do not know, whether they may not be good, rather than things that I know to be bad. Death is the better bet. That is why, throughout his life, Socrates, though threatened by death as he is now, couldn't care less, but instead sought not to do anything unjust or impious. Shortly thereafter, Socrates is found guilty of corrupting the youth. Meletus asks for the penalty of death, and after suggesting a feast instead at first, and then a large sum of money, the jury votes again and sentences Socrates to death. Socrates before had been threatened with the possibility of death. What follows is Socrates in the face of an imminent death. After warning those who voted him guilty of the ensuing criticisms, Socrates turns his attention to those who voted to acquit him, saying, To you, as being my friends, I want to show the meaning of what has occurred. These facts, Socrates condemned to death and an audience consisting of those who acquitted him, are two of the three major changes that allow him to move beyond the argument from uncertainty. The third change is the new evidence he acquired from his daimonion, or prophetic power. Throughout his life, Socrates claims that this prophetic power would speak up and oppose him when he was about to do something wrong, in his deeds or words. But here, with Socrates having chosen death, supposedly the worst of evils, over a minor injustice, his daimonion remains silent in confirmation. The findings of the daimonion, Socrates believes, applies to his new audience. From this, Socrates has moved beyond uncertainty, claiming, what has happened to me may well be a good thing, and those of us who believe death to be an evil are certainly mistaken. But it is important to note that Socrates does not say that it is a mistake for anyone to consider death a bad thing. Through his view, for the unjust and impious, death may prove to be the greatest of evils. Next, Socrates poses his famous two things argument, which, utilizing his new audience and the new evidence from his daimonion, concludes that, for those who Socrates is speaking to, death may either be as a dreamless sleep, and hence an advantage, or the beginning of one's time in Hades, and hence the greatest blessing there is. But without the acknowledgement of changes prior, and then further explanation, the argument can appear weak and breed criticisms. Thus, the two things argument must be carefully considered in its pieces. The argument consists of one premise and two conditionals. The premise reads as follows. Death is one of two things. Either the dead are nothing and have no perceptions of anything, or it is, as we are told, a change and a relocating for the soul from here to another place. Before going on, it must be made clear here that soul, for Socrates, does not necessarily mean anything beyond that which makes something alive. In its strongest form, this premise is nothing beyond the statement that, at death, perceptions either cease or continue as in an afterlife, and that they do not continue in the body that has just ceased to perceive. There is either annihilation or continuation. In the case of the former, Socrates states that if it is a complete lack of perception, like a dreamless sleep, then death would be a great advantage. For I think that if one had to pick out that night, during which a man slept soundly and did not dream, put beside it the other nights and days of his life, and then see how many days and nights have been better and more pleasant than that night, not only a private person, but the great king would find them easy to count, compared with the other days and nights. If death is like this, I say it is an advantage, for all eternity would then seem to be no more than a single night. This step of a complete lack of perception being likened to a dreamless sleep seems easily justified and has become a common analogy in discussions on death, and may ring similar to the view of death Epicurus articulated in his letter to Monetius. The next step, that a dreamless sleep is better and more pleasant than most, if not all, other days and nights, is harder to take. But none need believe that Socrates is saying that a dreamless sleep is some experience of euphoria. Instead, Socrates need only think that most days and nights are actually painful, and that it is an advantage to be free of such pains, the results of which might place Socrates next to the many philosophers who take everyday life to be inseparable from suffering. But this is only the first possible thing that death could entail. The second is a continuation of experience by the soul, or that which makes things living things. If, on the other hand, death is a change from here to another place, and what we are told is true, and all who have died are there, what greater blessing could there be, gentlemen of the jury? I think it would be pleasant. Most important, I could spend my time testing and examining people there as I do here, as to who among them is wise, and who thinks he is, but is not. This conditional makes a bolder claim than its predecessor. It is indeed undeniable that, if perceptions do not cease at death, that there is some form of afterlife. If there is not annihilation, there must be continuation. But how Socrates gets from there to a pleasant afterlife is more difficult. It's clear that Socrates is working with a conception of the afterlife that is common to the Greek mythology in the writing of Homer, that being the underworld or Hades. Implicit in such a view is that the good man will receive a good afterlife, while the bad man will be punished with a bad afterlife. And Socrates, who takes himself to be in the former category, is excited if this is to be the case. In death, he intends to do just as he did in life, philosophize with his fellow citizens. Only this time, he will have some of the greatest company, for it will consist of all the other good men, like Homer, Hesiod, Odysseus, and Sisyphus. But the modern reader is sure not to buy into this so easily, and may ask, why does Socrates not consider the possibility of an afterlife in which none of the things that are said are true? An afterlife in which there is no justice, no gods, or in which the gods torment the just, exactly as they are tormented by the unjust in this life. This possibility, which we are so keen to explore, would throw a wrench into the works of Socrates. But for Socrates, this is no possibility, for his commitment to piety, like his commitment to the good and the just, is unshakable. Socrates may say, there are indeed gods, and these gods are good and just. As I am good, the afterlife decided by the gods, who are also good and just, is bound to be good. So too for those of you who are good. But without the justice of the gods, the two things argument fails. Socrates' piety and the three major changes from the argument from uncertainty to the two things argument have allowed Socrates to go from the claim that one should not let one's fear of death outweigh one's dedication to justice to the claim that the good man has no reason to fear death. And Socrates maintains this positivity until the end with no sign of regret, saying, "You too must be of good hope as regards death, gentlemen of the jury, and keep this one truth in mind, that a good man cannot be harmed either in life or in death, and that his affairs are not neglected by the gods." And in the final words of the Apology, Socrates says, "Now the hour to part has come. I go to die, you go to live. What of us goes to the better lot is known to no one except the god." From then, Socrates is imprisoned to wait for his death, where one must imagine Socrates happy. Throughout this essay, I have referred to the thinker here as Socrates. However, this is not to attribute all thought to the historical Socrates. Socrates conducted philosophy through verbal argumentation rather than pen and paper. The Socratic dialogues that are available to us now are the work of Plato, a student of Socrates. And Plato is known for using figures, including Socrates, as his own mouthpiece. This leads to an interesting question for the history of philosophy. What then is the thought of Socrates and that of Plato? Who is the historical Socrates, and who is Plato's Socrates? This is an important question, and one that would prove even more challenging in the two other fruitful discussions of death within the work of Plato, namely the Phaedo and Republic, wherein Platonic forms play a great role. If you are interested in either this distinction between the historical Socrates and Plato's Socrates, or the view of death offered by Plato and Socrates in the Phaedo and Republic, then let me know. But that's all I've got to talk about today. As always, if you enjoyed the video, leave a like and subscribe. If you didn't enjoy it, disagreed with anything I said, or think I got something wrong, please let me know below. And until next time.